What would you do if the room you stepped into didn't let you leave? Tonight, I'll tell you a story about a place where time stops and the doors won't open. Not until it has what it wants. It all started with an ad. Josh had been looking for a cheap place to rent while he sorted out his life. So when he saw the listing for a fully furnished room in an old Victorian house for half the price of anything else in the city, he jumped at the chance. The pictures were a little grainy, and the listing didn't include much detail, but beggars couldn't be choosers. The landlady, Mrs. Whitlock, was an elderly woman, soft-spoken and frail. She mentioned the room had been empty for quite some time, but never explained why. The keys jingled in her shaking hand as she handed them over. The house was as unsettling in person as it had been in the photos. Tall, dark, and full of shadows. When Josh arrived that evening, the sky was an angry shade of gray, the wind whistling through the narrow streets. Inside, the house creaked and groaned with age. Mrs. Whitlock led him up the spiraling staircase to the third floor. The door to his room was heavy, the wood dark and scratched, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. The room itself was unremarkable, modest, with a bed, a desk, and a large window overlooking the street. But there was something about the air inside. Something off. The light felt dimmer in here, the silence thicker. And then there was the door. It closed with a soft click behind him. Josh tried to ignore the strange feeling creeping up his spine as he set his suitcase on the bed and took a deep breath. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. As he lay in bed, the house seemed to breathe around him, expanding and contracting with each creak. His eyes darted toward the door several times, but there was nothing unusual about it. Still, sleep didn't come easily. He awoke in the middle of the night to a soft knock. It was faint, coming from inside the room. Josh's heart raced as he sat up, listening. There it was again, but this time louder. It was coming from the wardrobe. Slowly, cautiously, he got out of bed and crossed the room. The wardrobe was old, its doors slightly ajar. Inside, there was nothing but shadows and a single wire hanger swinging slowly from side to side. His breath quickened. He was about to close it when he felt a cold breeze brush against his neck. He spun around to see the window had swung open on its own, the curtains billowing in the night air. Outside, there was no one. He shut the window, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling, but as he returned to bed, the wardrobe doors creaked open again behind him. The next morning, Josh tried to brush it off as a bad dream, but something had changed. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. The door, when he went to leave, wouldn't budge. The knob turned, but the door held fast. Panic gripped him for a moment, and he tugged harder, pulling with all his strength, but it was like the door was welded shut. The room felt oppressive now, like the walls were closing in. He pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one came. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed to blur in that place. His phone had no signal, and when he looked out the window, the street below was empty. The sky, once cloudy, was now a sickly green, casting a dim, unnatural light. That night, the knocking started again, louder this time. The wardrobe doors opened and closed, slamming as if someone or something was trapped inside. The window rattled violently, even though the wind outside had died. Josh sat in the corner, wrapped his hands over his ears, whispering to himself that it wasn't real. Then came the voice, a soft, whispering voice. It echoed from the walls, from the wardrobe, from beneath the floorboards. "Get out," it whispered, over and over, but the door still wouldn't open. Josh ran to the window, banging on the glass, but the street below was now distorted, like a warped painting. Buildings stretched and twisted in impossible angles. He wasn't in the same world anymore. Desperate, Josh grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window, but the glass wouldn't break. The voice grew louder, angrier. "Get out, get out." He turned toward the wardrobe, its doors flung open wide now. Inside, a shadowy figure crouched, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It stepped out slowly, its limbs long and twisted, its face barely human. The voice wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from the room itself, the walls shuddering as if the house were alive. The figure moved closer, and Josh backed into the corner. The room seemed to be folding in on itself, the air thick with a suffocating pressure. The figure's hollow eyes stared into his, and just as its hand reached out to touch him, the door burst open. Mrs. Whitlock stood there, her face pale and her voice trembling. "I told you not to stay," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "The room doesn't like to be ignored. It never lets anyone leave, unless it's found someone else to take their place. Not all rooms are empty. Some are waiting. So the next time you check into a new place, be careful what door you choose to close." For more stories like these, check out my previous videos and don't forget to subscribe.